If you've watched the video of Shelley's first training walk this year, you will have seen her say
85 miles is a long, long way.
Now, obviously it is a long way, but in this video I just want to highlight the fact that if you mentally play that thought over and over in your mind, it's going to hinder you in actually being able to do it. Now, obviously, the early part of the race, it's not going to be an issue. Primarily, you won't be having that thought of it being a long, long way. Initially, there's a lot of people about. There's generally 11, 12, 1,300 other competitors that you're going to be amongst. You've got all the support that you'll have on the roads, certainly up to Peel. Lots and lots of support from the local community, lots of support for the aid stations that the sponsors put on, and it really is an atmospheric endeavour, should we say, certainly up to Peel. It's brilliant. So you're not likely to be troubled with that thought of the 85 miles being a long, long way. Doesn't really crop up. You're going to be excited. You're going to be anticipating what's going to come, but in a nice positive way, really. And you're just going to get more carried along with everyone else. It's not going to be a big deal. However, once you've got to Peel, which is 32 miles, you still have 53 miles to go. And generally, once Peel's been and gone, because of the distance you've gone and potentially the speed you'll be doing, you're going to start to get the aches and the pains, maybe the muscle cramps, maybe, unless you watch my previous video on how I avoid getting blisters, maybe you'll have blisters and maybe they're going to be popping and maybe your feet are going to be really hurting. So it's at that point, and as you get further and further into the race, more and more tired, potentially more and more grouchy because your stomach starts to shut down with the food not being digested properly, and just general GI distress that you'll be getting. When the thought then crops up, 85 miles, it's a long, long way, that's when it's going to start to become debilitating, basically, and it's going to really hinder your chance of finishing. So my suggestion is, yes, it is a long way. You know that when you're signing up. You know that when you get on the start line. It is a long way. But you don't need to keep thinking about it. What I suggest you do is, perhaps as I do, I chunk the race down into sectors. So for me, I do it in thirds. So I look at Peel for the first third. From Peel to Lezayre, which is 61.5 miles, that's the second part of the race. And then from Lezayre to the finish is the last third. So that's the basic category. In effect, I have 3 races on the day, and that's all I think about. But if it starts to get really difficult, even those thirds might be too much, depending on how you're feeling at the time. So you can chunk it down even more. You can look to go simply church to church. And in that way, instead of it being one long race of 85 miles, you can look at it in terms of a series of short races from church to church. And if you do that, the different distances, obviously it varies depending on what part of the course you're on and what part of the race you're at. But it can be as low as 2 miles between the churches. So that's quite manageable. And the most it's going to be is 12 miles on a couple of the stretches. The one from Rushen to Patrick, I think, is about 12 miles. And the harder one, I think for most people, is the one from Mackled at 67 miles to Lonnan. Of course, that's going to be in the night time, which adds to the added difficulty, should we say. But it's still 12 miles. So that's the worst case scenario. If you're doing church to church, 12 miles. And that's a lot more manageable, easier mentally to cope with than thinking 85 miles. That's a long, long way. So that is probably the negative aspect to the thought it's a long, long way and it's 85 miles. What I would also mention is the converse, because there are going to be lots of times, hopefully, where you're feeling up, positive, relaxed, and things just seem to be flowing really easily. And in them moments, you can sometimes project your mind forward to the finish as though you're already there. And you can feel good around it. The problem is, things can change very quickly. So, like back in 2015, on that particular day when I was doing the race, I felt really comfortable up to Andreas, which is 55 miles. And when I got to Andreas, my pacing was, for me, really good. I was on target for an 18-hour finish, which is pretty fast. But I didn't finish in 18 hours. I ended up finishing in 19 and a half. And the reason for that was that when I got to Andreas, suddenly from feeling pretty good and comfortable, I had a massive slump. And I felt terrible suddenly, which necessitated me stopping for over 21 minutes, I think, at the time. But of course, after the stop, I never really regained the same pace and comfort level that I'd had prior to stopping temporarily at Andreas. So things can change really quickly in the endurance races. So just as it's not good to think in terms of it negatively as being too far away, doesn't pay to think you're there at the finish when you've still got 30 miles to go. That's still longer than a marathon. So the mind's a tricky thing. You have to see the tricks it's playing on you. And with that in mind, my main suggestion in this video, when you're doing the race, is aim to be as present as you can what you're doing at the time. So concentrate on how you're feeling, how you're going, your surroundings, and try and keep the mind more present, more focused on what you're doing in the moment, and not to get carried away with being at the finish or not being able to make it to the finish, whichever aspect the mind plays on you in effect. So yeah, that's it. That's the gist for today. Look at the race in terms of shorter distances, and then bit by bit, those shorter distances add up to the 85 miles. And when you finish, the 85 miles won't seem such a long way. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.